The oath that holds the universe together. Part 3 of 8. Because you have done this thing. Welcome back to this series. We are 3 sessions deep into Genesis chapter 22 verse 15-18, and every layer we remove reveals another layer beneath it. In part 1 we heard the second voice from heaven, the Shenit that ratifies rather than merely repeats, and we discovered the theological transition from Elohim the judge to YHWH the covenant partner. In part 2 we descended into Binishbati, by myself I have sworn, and we felt the Nifal perfect tense declare that God's oath is already complete from the divine side of eternity, already sealed, already deposited in the spiritual account of every soul that stands in Abraham's seed. Today we arrive at the phrase that has generated one of the most important theological debates in the entire history of the church. Ya and Asher asita et hadavar hazeh. Because you have done this thing. This is the phrase that asks the hardest question in all of biblical theology. What is the relationship between what Abraham did and what God swore? Is this oath earned? Is it a reward for spiritual performance? Or is it something far more complex, far more beautiful, and far more healing than a divine paycheck handed out for work completed? We are going to sit with this question at a depth that most preaching bypasses entirely, because the answer determines how you live your entire spiritual life. The grammar of completed obedience. The grammatical structure of Ya and Asher is a causal conjunction, a because construction, that introduces a subordinate clause explaining the occasion for the divine oath. Ya means on account of. Asher is the relative pronoun introducing the specific act being cited. Together they create a cause and effect syntactic relationship that has caused every major theological tradition to ask the same question. Is Abraham's obedience the cause of God's blessing, or is it the occasion? The verb at the center of the clause is asita, the cul perfect second masculine singular of as, to do, to act, to accomplish. The perfect aspect here is decisive. It is not saying Abraham is in the process of obeying. It is not saying Abraham will obey if conditions remain favorable. It is saying Abraham's obedience has become an ontological fact in the fabric of salvation history. Something irreversible has occurred. The act has entered time and will never leave it. It is established. It is real. And God names it. The Vulgate renders the square facesti remhenk, because you have done this thing. Jerome's word rem, the thing, underscores the physical concreteness of the act. Faith here is not an abstract inner sentiment. It is embodied obedience with weight and texture. A mountain was climbed. Wood was carried. A knife was raised. The act entered time and space. Rem. The thing. Physical. Dense. Irreversible. What Ephraim the Syrian called the furnace of Moriah is illuminated here. Fear entered the furnace as carbon, dark and combustible. Covenant emerged from the furnace as diamond, crystalline and harder than anything that had tried to break it. The pressure of complete surrender did not destroy Abraham. It transformed him into something that could bear the weight of a promise as vast as the starry sky. The great theological debate. Merit or grace? Augustine of Hippo wrestles with Ya and Asher in his De Gratia et Libero Arbitrio and arrives at a conclusion that is as subtle as it is important. For Augustine, Abraham's obedience in Genesis chapter 22 was itself a gift of grace. The capacity to climb that mountain, to bind that sun, to lift that knife, was not generated from within Abraham's natural human strength. It was the overflow of the faith that had been imputed to him as far back as Genesis chapter 15, which was itself the result of divine election and prior grace. So when God says because you have done this thing, He is not acknowledging an independent human achievement that earned a divine reward. He is acknowledging the fruit of his own prior grace, the visible expression in history of what he had already implanted in Abraham's spirit through decades of covenant relationship. John Calvin makes a parallel argument in his commentaries on Genesis, insisting that Yah and Asher must be understood as occasion language rather than merit language. The covenant with Abraham was already established in Genesis chapter 12, deepened in Genesis chapter 15, and sealed in circumcision in Genesis chapter 17. The test of Genesis chapter 22 did not create the covenant. It revealed the depth of Abraham's appropriation of it. The fruit confirmed the root. The obedience did not purchase the blessing. The obedience demonstrated that the person standing on the mountain was the same person who had been walking with God for decades, whose faith had been growing in the dark, and who was now, on this mountain, showing what that faith had become. James chapter 2 verse 22 makes this precise argument in the New Testament, stating that faith was working together with Abraham's works, and as a result of the works faith was perfected, brought to its completion. The Greek word teleo, perfected, carries the sense of something that has reached its fullest expression, its intended end, its mature form. At Moriah, Abraham's faith reached teleo. It became fully what it had been in seed form since Genesis chapter 12. And God said Yah and Asher. Because this faith reached its fullness here. Synergeia. The Eastern contribution. The Eastern Orthodox tradition approaches Yah and Asher through the lens of synergeia, divine-human cooperation, which is the distinctive contribution of the Greek fathers to this theological question. Maximus the Confessor, writing in the 7th century, distinguishes between the natural will of the human person, which is the deep ontological orientation of the soul toward God and the good, and the gnomic will, the deliberative faculty that weighs options and makes choices under conditions of uncertainty. At Moriah, Abraham's gnomic will, the deliberative part of him that could have constructed 100 theological arguments against the command, chose to align itself with the natural will's orientation toward God. The calculating mind stopped calculating and simply followed the voice. And in that alignment of human will with divine will, Abraham participated in the divine energies in a way that was historically unprecedented. Gregory Palamas would add that this was not merely a moral achievement. It was a theotic event. Not that Abraham's nature was changed into the divine nature, because the divine essence remains forever inaccessible to creatures. But Abraham participated in the divine energies so fully in that moment of complete surrender that the shape of his being was permanently altered. He came down from the mountain different from the person who had climbed it. Divine witnessing as trauma healing. The trauma recovery dimensions of Yah and Asher asita are profound and must not be bypassed. Because you have done this thing is, in its most elemental psychological function, an act of divine witnessing. To be witnessed is one of the most fundamental human needs, and one of the deepest wounds of trauma is the wound of invisibility. The wound that comes from acting faithfully, giving generously, obeying at enormous personal cost, and having no one see it, no one name it, no one say I saw what you did and it mattered. Judith Herman's foundational work on trauma recovery identifies witnessing as a core mechanism of healing. The traumatic experience that was suffered alone, in silence, without acknowledgement, must be received into a relational space where it is seen and named before integration can occur. Many people who grew up in environments of neglect or performance-based love carry the wound of the unseen faithful servant. They worked hard. They obeyed the rules. They sacrificed. And no one noticed. Or what was noticed was never enough to satisfy the demand for more. The silence after their obedience was the most crushing part of the experience. When God says Yah and Asher asita, because you have done this thing, He is doing something that goes far beyond legal acknowledgement. He is seeing Abraham fully. He is naming what Abraham did with the weight of divine recognition. He is breaking the silence after the obedience with a word that says your faithfulness was real, it was received in heaven, it was seen by the one who sees all things, and it matters. For the person who has never received this kind of witnessing from the authority figures of their early life, the divine en-Asher is a reparenting of the deepest kind. And then notice what God does not do after acknowledging Abraham's obedience. He does not ask for more. He does not say, well done, now here is the next test, even harder than the last. He swears. He pours out blessing. He expands the promise to cosmic dimensions. The acknowledgement of obedience is not the doorway to escalating demands. It is the doorway to overflowing covenant grace. This is the opposite of every abusive authority structure that uses religious language to extract compliance. The God Messiah acknowledges your effort and responds with an oath that far exceeds anything your effort could have produced. And have not withheld. The depth of lo chasek. The phrase velo chasek ta et bicha et yachidecha, and you have not withheld your son, your only son, deserves its own meditation. The verb chasek means to withhold, to hold back, to spare, to restrain. The negative lo chasek, you did not hold back, expresses the complete release of the one thing that Abraham's entire covenantal future depended upon. Bicha, your son, establishes the relational category. Yachidecha, your only one, your unique one, the irreplaceable one, drives the weight of the cost deeper still. In Hebrew, Yachid means the one of its kind, the one in whom all hope is concentrated. The one whose loss would mean the end of everything. Many of us have an inner Yachidecha. It is not always a literal child. It is the thing we have been holding back from God because the terror of losing it is too great. A relationship that defines us. A dream we have built our identity around. A self-image we are not willing to surrender. A theological framework that gives us the sense that God is manageable and safe. Abraham shows us that the lo chasek, the not withholding, is not the loss of what we love. It is the discovery that the God to whom we release what we love is the same God who gives it back multiplied by an oath that spans the stars and the sand. Inner healing reflection. Imagine what you have been withholding from God. Picture yourself on the mountain of Moriah. You place this inner Isaac on the altar. You feel the panic rise. Now something unexpected happens. A voice from heaven calls a second time, not to ask for more, but to swear blessing over you. The knife is lowered. Your heart remains open. You discover that surrender does not end in emptiness but in a new covenant of blessing that you could never have received while your hands were clenched around what you were afraid to lose. Affirmation. God sees my faithfulness. My surrender is received in heaven and responded to with an oath. What I have given is real. What I have done is witnessed. The divine en-Asher is spoken over my life. And the God who names my obedience does not then demand more. He swears. He blesses. He multiplies. This is part 3 of 8. In part 4 we descend into the specific content of what God swore, the double grammar of barech avarechcha, blessing I will bless you, and we discover why the grammar of the Hebrew language itself becomes a drumbeat of divine abundance that the English translation simply cannot contain. Subscribe now so part 4 reaches you the moment it releases. Share part 3 with someone who has been carrying an inner Yachidecha in clenched hands. Reach out to us at christ4life143@gmail.com. Stay tuned for the next video. Join us next time as we continue verse by verse.